Okay, let's choose up. I'll take Jamal and Tutal. You can have Chubbs and Skippy. Let's go. My ball.
Okay. But you got skins.
Not a good negotiator? You don't have to be a good negotiator at McCarthy Chevrolet. McCarthy guarantees the lowest prices on a new Chevy or we'll pay you $10,000. We guarantee there's no need to shop anyplace else. McCarthy Chevrolet, I-35 and Santa Fe, Olathe.
Welcome back, Track Talk on Sports Radio 810 WHB. I'm Scott. He's Kirk. We're at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum. Joining us now is a good friend of the RacinBoys, Bob Baker. How you doing, Bob?
Good morning. How you guys doing this morning?
We're doing well. Thanks for allowing us to be up here again for I don't know how many years we've done Track Talk here in the Hall of Fame. And there's always something new to look at. And this year, like last year when we were at the Hall of Fame, you had Tony Stewart's a variety of cars that he drove during his career. This year, it's Jeff Gordon. And, wow, all I can say is some of the cars that are down there are pretty cool to look at.
And we're very fortunate to have Jeff's cars with us here for our Salute to Champion Jeff Gordon. The cars will be here through the end of the year, so if people can't get in the next couple of weeks during the Knoxville Nationals, they'll be here through December 31st. And we've got Jeff's USAC Midget, his Wing Sprint car, his USAC Silver Crown car, his USAC Pavement Sprint car, of course, his Busch Grand National Baby Ruth car. First stock car he raced, and then his Cup car that he won his first Cup race in back in 1994 at Charlotte Motor Speedway. So very fortunate to get all the cars here from across the country, and want to thank all the people that helped us get the cars here.
I've got to also mention that Jeff Gordon himself is going to be here. Is it Wednesday of next week? If I'm not, Shane Stewart, Paul Silva Racing have teamed up with Jeff Gordon to do a Kick It for Cancer. It's one of Jeff Gordon's foundations.
Yep. The ladies were here last night scoping Knoxville out, and it's real interesting because this is their first time to Iowa, let alone Knoxville Raceway or to a sprint car race. And they were calling saying, well, do we need to get a cavalcade for Jeff, and do we need to get police protection, and do we need – I said, this is Knoxville. Just bring him to the Hall of Fame or to the racetrack, and we'll be fine. And they say, well, what about security? How many bodyguards do you think? I said, you don't need any of that here. They said, when we come, what kind of a pass do we need to get in the parking lot? And I said, just come in the front entrance and ask for us, and we'll be fine.
Wouldn't you think they just asked Jeff what it's like to come to Knoxville? He's been here before. You'd have thought he would have said, no, none of that's necessary.
Well, I think Jeff's busy with his NASCAR schedule, his sponsors, and in New York he's flying in with his
people,
nephew.
His people handle those kind of things.
Right, they handle everything. They'll have a car for him ready to bring him from the airport to Knoxville, and he'll be spending time with Shane Stewart here.
They didn't bother Jeff with all those minutiae details.
Well, let's face it. Jeff Gordon, we all know when he goes out in the general public, especially a NASCAR event, he gets swarmed. But, we found out with Tony Stewart that people respect these guys when they show up in events like here at the Knoxville Nationals, and they're going to give him his space a little bit. Is there going to be some people that are going to try to cling on and get autographs? Absolutely. But I don't think you're going to see it to where, you need president-type security for him to walk around here.
It's going to be pretty easy, and I think he's probably talked to Tony Stewart and Casey Kane, the guys that hang out at Knoxville, during the Nationals, and they've told him, hey, it's a lot of fun. You can, just have a good time, and you're not hounded for autographs all the time, and people want you to do this and do that and be on TV and do an interview and all the different things that they have to do every day when they're in the NASCAR
Where's he going to watch
world.
the race? Do we know that? Will he be up here in the Hall of Fame? Will he have a suite? Or like Tony Stewart, will he be down in the infield? Him and Casey Kane, they love to be down there amongst the people.
I think he's going to be in the infield. I know he's good friends with Paul Silva, the car owner of the Kick It team that they're sponsoring.
Through his stepdad.
Right, through John Bickford. And John was very instrumental in helping us get the race cars to the Hall of Fame. But I think Jeff will be in the infield during the races because he wants to show his nephew, his 15-year-old nephew from Belgium that's coming with him, sprint car racing.
Oh, how about that? Yeah, so that's an interesting twist right there. I did not know that.
It'll be his nephew's first time at a sprint car race, so I think that they're excited about coming to a sprint car race and Jeff showing him his roots in sprint car racing.
What are some of the other major events that you got planned here coming up for the next week? This is your biggest week of the year, isn't it?
It is, and we have events every day. We have 3 fanfare forums, which are free once you pay your $4 to come into the museum. We have 3 a day, one at 11, one at 1 o'clock, and one at 3 o'clock. And those are where we interview drivers, talk to people in the sport. Our 2 most popular fanfare forums, one is called the Women in Racing, and we usually have standing room only for that. And you get the Aaron Crockers and the ladies that race sprint cars and the people behind the scenes in racing. And the other one is the Pennsylvania Posse, and that's where Bruce Ellis, the announcer at Williams Grove Speedway, comes in with about 12 to 15 of the Pennsylvania posse drivers, and they talk about racing in Pennsylvania and what the state of sprint car racing is back east in the state of Pennsylvania around Williams Grove.
Most people will recognize Pennsylvania is the hub outside of maybe Knoxville of where sprint car racing is the most popular. Some of the best drivers. I remember, Bob, now you're a historian, so you would know this. There was a day when there was two areas in the country where great sprint car drivers came from. It was Pennsylvania, and really Kansas City was just a huge hub for great sprint car drivers.
You're exactly right, and also California because of Legion Park, Ascot Raceway out there. But there were a lot of Kansas City drivers that came up to Knoxville. They nicknamed the Weld family the Kansas City Mafia because they came to Knoxville, took the money, all the big purse money out of Knoxville, and went back to Kansas City. So Kansas City has a reputation for great short-track sprint car racing drivers that have come to Knoxville and then gone on to Indianapolis, other forms of racing.
Yeah. Who would you, and this might be unfair, but who would think would be the biggest name here from the Midwest? You know, we can go back in history. The Weld brothers, obviously, there's a lot of options there. Jan Opperman, Doug Wolfgang. I mean, when people come into the Hall of Fame, is there one driver that they say, where's his picture? Where's his exhibit? I want to see where he's at. Is there one driver that stands out to you?
There's probably two or three. Jan Opperman is one of those drivers that people want to see his hat, his moccasins, his driving uniform, learn more about him. We sell out of his books, dialed in every time we get them in the bookstore.
Flamboyant driver, right?
Very outgoing. I remember as a young man meeting him in Topeka Raceway with my brother, and we were in grade school at the time. He'd won the feature, and we went down and looked at his car, and he was receiving his trophy and everything after the races. And I said, "Did you boys have a good time at the races?" We said, "Oh, yeah, it was a lot of fun." He goes, "Come back and see us again." And he was very outgoing. You know,
right.
To take a minute just to say hi to a couple of kids.
Charismatic guy, yeah.
Yep, and I think he carried that on across the country, and people, you know, he gathered a real following. And so I think Jan Opperman is one of those drivers. Of course, Doug Wolfgang is one of those drivers. Steve Kinzer, people come into the Hall of Fame from across the world, and where's the Steve Kinzer exhibit, and where's Steve's cars, and where's
the
pictures?
King, right.
He's the king. He's won more sprint car races, modern-day sprint car races, than anybody. A lot of people really look forward to seeing and learning more about those drivers.
Wasn't it Jan Opperman really the first sprint car driver that broke through and had the impression amongst race fans that he was as good, if not better, than what they had in USAC? I mean, when he won that big race at Terre Haute that one time on national TV, here's an outsider, quote-unquote, that came in and beat all these USAC stars.
He was the first outlaw. He was the one that did not follow a group, whether it be the AAA or United States Auto Club, and he would go where the money was. If there was a big money race in Kansas City, he'd be there, and then 2 or 3 days later, he'd be in Knoxville. 2 or 3 days later, California, Washington, then he'd cross the country to California. He found a way with the help of sponsors like Bill Smith, Speedy Bill Smith, to get across the country.
Car, right?
Exactly, and make those big money races and make a name for himself and a following that to this day still follows him through, you know, his history.
And you mentioned Doug Wolfgang. I don't think there's anybody, I've been coming here to Knoxville a lot of years, but I can't remember one driver who captivated the fan base here at Knoxville as much as Doug Wolfgang did and filled these grandstands in the mid-'70s and really changed sprint car racing as we knew it at that time.
You're exactly right. Doug Wolfgang has a place in his heart for Knoxville Raceway, and our museum. He's always willing to help us with things, even today, whether it's an autograph session to come in and meet people. But if Doug just walks into our museum, he'll be stopped 5 or 6 times from people wanting to say hello, get an autograph, talk with him about his son Robbie Wolfgang's career. Yeah. You know, just be close to Doug because he's so friendly and outgoing.
And the Wolf World car as well. He's building his own sprint car.
He is. He's building those up in South Dakota, up in his hometown there, with Robbie helping him. And I think that they've got more and more cars they're getting out. So as time goes on, I think they'll fine-tune and just get it even better.
Yeah, and unfortunately his career cut short. You know, I have to believe that Doug Wolfgang still had a few wins left in him if he didn't get hurt down there at Lakeside Speedway. And let's face it, Jan Opperman the same way, you know, had that terrible head injury that he suffered in an accident. And I think his career was cut short as well. I think he would have went on to win a lot more races if he wouldn't have had that problem.
I think you're exactly right. Several of the drivers we've talked about, their careers have been prolonged by luck. by not being hurt in the racing and being able to overcome the injuries that they've had.
Bob, that brings me to a question. You know, when I go around the Hall of Fame and I look at some of the pictures and some of the cars, and I think to myself, really? Guys really drove cars like this the way they drove them back in those days, all hiked up, sliding around with no roll cage, just their head flying in the wind with leather helmets. It really, we have to take it upon ourselves to make sure that we recognize those guys that built the foundation for these guys that are out here racing today. And I think that's the most important thing for the Hall of Fame to do, is to let people know about the history and the foundation that has been built and is continually being built as time goes on.
You're exactly right, Scott. It's an educational process.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we try to have older cars in museums so people can, younger people especially, see how sprint car open wheel racing started. I'm looking right over your shoulder up here in the Hall of Fame, and I see the picture of Greg Weld in his big sprint car, and it's just got the roll bar behind his head. There's no roll cage or anything, the big tires, big wheels. And you think, my gosh, that car turns over. You know, that's going to be the end of Greg, but that's the way it was.
One thing that we always love to see when we get up here, and I was just looking at a picture over here. He's inducted in 2006, Lanny Edwards. I mean, it's not just drivers that the Hall of Fame recognizes. You've got promoters, people that have helped this sport get where it's at today, media members. He's just a variety of different people. How does a person become eligible for the Hall of Fame, and how does the committee look at that, and how are they submitted? Just take us through that whole process.
It's a two-step process. Every year in September, we send out a blank nomination form, and the 72 members that vote, or voters, National Nominating Committee members, fill in those blanks, return those to us, and the high vote getters make the final ballot. Our voters are scattered across the country evenly because we're a national organization. So we have 18 voters on the West Coast, 18 right here where we are in the Midwest, middle of the country, 18 in the Mideast, which is Ohio, Pennsylvania, and then 18 voters on the East Coast. Excuse me. So we have voters scattered across the country, and they determine who actually is voted into the Hall of Fame. Of course, there's categories: the driver category, the owner mechanic category, the officials category, the car sponsors category.
Right.
You know, look over your other shoulder, and there's Ralph Capitani's picture and Earl Baltus's picture, and like you said, Lanny Edwards, and, you know, Shane Carson, his dad, Bud Carson.
Right.
It's just
and that's the same committee that votes the yearly awards as well?
It's a little bit different. Those are voted on by the media members, manufacturers, promoters, the insiders in the sport, whereas it's a different group of people that vote on the National Induction Committee. Those are the historians. Those are people who have written books.
That know the history of the sport.
The Chris Economakis, the Dave Argerbrights, the people that spend their time doing the research. Pat Sullivan is another one back in Indianapolis. People that have not only done the research, but when they see a name on a nomination ballot, they're going to take the time and go find a book and read about that person and say, is this really a guy that needs to be in the Sprint Car Hall of Fame? You know, they're not just
is he
having
worthy?
hunches.
Right.
It's a lifetime achievement award to be nominated to be into our Hall of Fame, and everybody, all those 72 National Nominating Committee members, take it very serious.
We're at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum just outside Turn 2 at Knoxville Raceway, getting ready for the final night of the ASCS Knoxville Nationals coming up tonight. You can hear it live on RacinBoys.com. Bob Baker joining us here this morning. You're from Kansas City. There is a rich connection and a big history between Kansas City and Knoxville. Why is Kansas City such a big open-wheel town?
I think it started years ago with open-wheel racing in Kansas City, maybe even before Olympic Stadium, when they had the big midget races. A.J. Foyt, of course, won his first midget race in Kansas City. And
all the way to the board track, the $500,000 speedway is what they called it out there at 85th Street.
Yep, 95th and Bannister, right where the
95th.
Yeah, right over there in that area. And I think it's just a history because different pockets of the country, whether you take like the southeast part of the country and the southwest, stock car racing was big in the South. You take the Midwest, you take the upper eastern states, it was open-wheel racing. Even California with Ascot, open-wheel racing just kind of took on in those areas, similar to how stock car racing took on in the South.
Yeah. Well, I know one thing. I'm proud of the heritage of what's happened in Kansas City. And my favorite little trivia question that I like to put out to people, where did A.J. Foyt win his first USAC midget race?
I know. I was there.
You were in 1957 Olympic Stadium.
I don't remember it. My dad said, never forget, you saw
You're not
A.J.
that
Foyt.
old.
I'm that old.
Yeah.
You saw A.J. Foyt win his first midget race in Kansas City, and I was like, okay, whatever. You
Whatever.
know,
I was young, but I was there.
It was a big deal.
Right.
The Weld family has been a big part of that, too, and just how much of an influence they've had in Kansas City and here at Knoxville. You're close to the Weld family. Talk about their influence.
I tell you what, Greg, Jerry, Kenny, the whole family, all the racers in the family, and even the family, you know, the wives and the sisters and the nephews.
They carry the name proudly, don't they?
It is a very proud racing family, and they've got a lot to be proud of. You know, Kenny made a name for himself here in the Midwest and then wanted to do more racing, moved to Pennsylvania, where he could race, 3, 4, 5 nights a week.
The great innovator. I think so many people look at Kenny Weld as what he did as a driver. And I know that he had some problems in life, but he made his way through that. And after those times, he was really the guy that developed the CNC machine that so many different people use in this world now. He was the guy that made the very first one and ended up selling that. I can't remember. It was either Richard Childress or somebody down south, but he was the first guy to invent the CNC machine. That tells you how those Weld brothers were wired. I mean, you look at Greg and the wheel company and how innovative he was in bringing the state-of-the-art wheels to the general public the way he did, and sprint car wheels. Bright minds with the Weld family.
You know, and all that happened in Kansas City.
Right.
Kansas City has such a, not just with drivers, but the innovation that Kenny had with the heads is still in business today in Indiana, back in Bloomington, with the Weld Tech company. And then you take Greg with his wheel company. You'd walk in the office, you see the big drawings of the wheels and all the tools and everything he had laid out, to design wheels.
He was a visionary, too. I mean, he had that, he was able to think ahead several years in advance and work towards those goals, too. I knew Greg. He was a very bright guy.
And his passion was always the racing.
Yeah. Well, let's don't forget about Jerry Weld as well. We call him Butch. I mean, most people that knew him, he was Butch, but he's Jerry Weld. Might have been the most talented driver, but his life was cut short.
Yep, I did see Jerry race a few times, and I remember watching Jerry race. But more than that, I remember Jerry as a promoter at Olympic Stadium and some of the different races across the Kansas City area. But he was a great racer and a great friend of the racers, too. He was one of the gang.
Yeah, no doubt. Bob, thanks so much for allowing us to come up here and be a part of the Hall of Fame and museum. It is always an honor to come up here and walk around, and I get kind of caught up right before the show. We're setting up, and next thing you know, I'm drifting off looking at things. So thanks again for allowing us to be up here and do what we do.
Thank you for coming up this morning.
And just for people who are coming up for the Nationals, your hours of operation and a little bit about the next week.
We're open at 10 o'clock in the morning until the races are over on race night. So if it's 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night, we're open. We have a great display in our museum right now. We have the BR Motorsports cutaway sprint car that's featured on the television telecast of
Probably
World
the
of Outlaw
nicest
Races.
Cutaway car I've ever seen.
It is. It's a modern day, and it's a great tool for educating young people and sprint car fans about what the inner workings of the components of the race cars are. Got that, of course, our salute to champion Jeff Gordon with 6 of Jeff's race cars in the museum, and a 11-minute video highlights him racing all 6 of those cars.
Cool.
Of course, the T-shirts, his trophy. We have his Brickyard trophy from the inaugural Brickyard 400 in 1994.
Right.
And we have his first Cup trophy, his first Busch trophy.
How cool.
Just a lot of memorabilia.
What's in the movie theater right
In the
now?
movie theater, we're trying to put something different on about every 2 to 3 hours. We have over 250 open-wheel films here at the Hall of Fame now. So we're trying to show something different about every 2 to 3 hours and just keep it fresh.
How about that? Great job, Bob, and you're a great asset to the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum in Knoxville and the community, and we're proud to call you a friend. Thanks for being on the show. Appreciate
Thank you, guys, and please, if you are thinking about coming up to Knoxville, do it. Come up and see the Knoxville Nationals this next week. You'll never regret it.
Hey, and if you're in Kansas City, you have time to get up here tonight, right?
That's right.
That's
Tonight's
right.
grace is the 360 Knoxville Nationals.
That's right.
Tonight, 7 o'clock, right here in Knoxville.
All right, Bob. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Kirk.
All right,
Thanks,
we're
Bob.
going to take a break. You're listening to Track Talk on Sports Radio 810 WHB. Track Talk is brought to you by McCarthy Chevrolet. Check them out at McCarthyChevrolet.com. We'll be back with more in a moment. Stay tuned.